It's Kyle here, and today I'll be talking about my 5 favorite nonfiction books. I'm a huge fan of nonfiction. I know a lot of people really can't get into it, but I've always been a big fan of nonfiction. In fact, I usually try to rotate fiction, nonfiction when I'm reading, just to help things stay fresh and kind of change up my reading habits and stuff. If you're not into nonfiction, I would recommend, if there's some topic that interests you, say like, mountain biking, movies, some sort of music or art, find a nonfiction book on that topic, and all odds you'll probably enjoy it. I think a lot of times when people think of nonfiction, they get too focused on books about war or politics, which, funny enough, are mainly the books I'm into. But there's books about mountain climbing if you're into mountain climbing, or if you're really into, like I said, art. There's nonfictions of books about that, or a specific form of music, or movies. There's nonfiction books on nearly any topic you can think of. So just find one on the topic you're interested in and give it a try, because I think a lot of people just automatically write off nonfiction without ever really giving it a fair chance. So hope you'll give it a chance. And now let me get on to my 5 favorite nonfiction books. These are in no specific order. I tried to rank them, but I just couldn't make up my mind. So these are randomly ordered, my 5 favorite nonfiction books. Up first is Mascar Palace, The Doomed Royal Dynasty of Nepal by Jonathan Gregson. This book I actually read as a part of a class I took in college on the politics of South Asia. It's a very fascinating book. It's a very interesting story that it kind of goes into. Nepal, until very recently, was ruled by monarchy, in an absolute monarchy. The king had complete power. In fact, the people in Nepal really looked up to the king as a god. It was very much old school politics. Think of Europe during the Dark Ages. The king had absolute power. Very, very much is ingrained in the way the king was viewed. Most people felt like this system was going to go on for a long, long time. There was no sign that this was really going to change anytime soon. This all changed because of the massacre at the palace. Basically, there was a prince in the royal family who was a bit of a drunkard, used drugs a lot, was a partier, was kind of viewed as by the rest of the royal family as a bit of a failure, and they definitely let him know about that. So he was depressed. He knew how his family viewed him, and basically he snapped, and he got some guns, and he went through the royal palace, and he killed most of the royal family, completely wiped them out, including the king. Completely changed how the people in Nepal viewed the monarchy, because one, this brought to light all this dirty laundry about the royal family that the general public in Nepal had no idea was going on, and also because it killed so many members of the royal family, the member of the family who ended up and survived and became the king was somebody who was already kind of unpopular with the people in Nepal. And once he became king, the kind of monarchy began to slip very, very quickly. In fact, not too long after the events of this book, the monarchy basically began to lose power, and in fact, as of today, the monarchy doesn't exist anymore in Nepal. So this one prince who went on a shooting rampage ended a political establishment that ruled Nepal for a very, very, very long time. But it's just an interesting story, that you don't really think of when people go on shooting rampages. You think of some lone, crazy guy, shooting up a school or going to a mall or something like that. You don't really think of a prince in a royal family that has absolute power going crazy and killing the other members of the royal family. It really almost feels like a topic that would be in a movie, not something that happened in real life. So, very fascinating book. That's why I enjoyed this one so much. Next up, Alexander Hamilton by Chernow. Alexander Hamilton is the founding father of the United States. I find the most interesting. Has an absolutely fascinating bio from growing up as an orphan in the Caribbean, and very poor, to at a very young age becoming evident that he's absolutely a genius, making his way to America. Very early on in the Revolutionary War, becoming Chief of Staff to George Washington while he's still very young, playing a huge role in the ratification of the U.S. Constitution by writing the Federalist Papers with John Madison and John Jay, then helping to shape the American political establishment through his role of George Washington's administration. Had a huge role in shaping a lot of precedents that now we take for granted as a tradition in American politics. Hamilton started a lot of those traditions. Just a completely fascinating figure. Really enjoyed this book. This is by far the best book I've ever read on Hamilton. So if you're interested in early American history or politics, or just want to find out more about this really interesting figure, Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow is a great book to read. Next up is Marching Through Georgia by Lee Kennett. I actually live in Georgia, and my family's lived here since 1840, so obviously we were hugely impacted by the American Civil War. For those that aren't familiar, General Sherman of the Union Army marched through Georgia and basically unleashed total war, burnt farms, cities, destroyed railroad tracks, everything. Took the war to the civilians was basically a strategy to make the South quit the war, and it was a very successful strategy. So obviously any family that's lived in Georgia a long time has been hugely impacted by that. For example, the town I live in now was burnt by Sherman. I had several ancestors that fought in the Civil War. So everybody has a huge impact of it. So when you grow up in Georgia, you just hear about Sherman burning stuff. I mean, everybody has probably seen Gone with the Wind or read the book. Atlanta famously burns in that. You just hear about that all the time. I once had a teacher in high school that was actually from Indiana, and she'd moved down here, and she said that one of the big things she noticed when she taught U.S. history in the North, the kids knew very little about the Civil War. To them, it was just like any other part of history. They knew about as much about the Civil War as they did about World War I or World War II, the American Revolution. They didn't have any special knowledge of it. When she got to the South, she was amazed at how much knowledge the kids in the South knew about the Civil War, mainly because I think it's just passed down as oral tradition. You just told people when you go through town, oh, that's the one building in town that wasn't burnt by General Sherman. You know, this is what happened. So you just kind of grew up hearing about it, which is why I enjoyed this book so much, because this book is very interesting because it doesn't tell about Sherman's march through Georgia from the point of view of General Sherman or the Confederate generals that are opposing him, or from Abraham Lincoln, or from Jefferson Davis. Instead, it tells the story of this campaign through the eyes of more of the common people involved. So from the eyes of the soldiers in the Union Army, from the Confederate soldiers, from the civilians in Georgia that were impacted, from the slaves in Georgia that were impacted. So you get a lot of diary entries and interviews that appeared in newspapers after the war and stuff. So you get a lot more raw emotion, where, you know, usually from the leadership point of view, when you read books, you get more tactics and grand strategy. This book deals more like, you know, my house is burnt, I've lost my farm, I'm a slave, you know, I just have been liberated, I'm a soldier, and my best friend just got killed in trying to take Atlanta. So you get a lot of raw emotion. It's very fascinating to see how this very violent period of American history impacted these people in this book. So I really enjoyed this book. It's a very fascinating read. Next up, you have Franklin and Winston. An intimate portrait of an epic friendship by John Meacham. This book is really interesting because it delves into the relationship between two of the most important figures in world history, Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And what's really interesting is these two developed a very close friendship during World War II. I mean, a lot of times when you think of politics and world leaders, you know they work together a lot. They don't really become friends. They're just kind of, you know, political partners. They're involved in treaties and stuff like that. Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill really became very, very close friends, and this book really explores that friendship. And to me, it's a really interesting read because you have these two figures who shaped so much of world history. The world we live in now would have been completely different without the leadership abilities of Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. And the fact these two became such close friends, and to see how the events of World War II impacted their friendship, it's just a really interesting book. I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it to anybody. I think anybody would enjoy this book. Last up is Stonewall Jackson and the American Civil War by G.F.R. Henderson. I think most people probably wouldn't enjoy this book as much as I do. This book was actually published in 1898 by a British historian. Stonewall Jackson is a very revered military strategist. He was a general for the Confederacy during the Civil War. He's considered one of the best military minds in American history. The reason I say I don't think a lot of people would enjoy this book is, in addition to being a a very detailed history of the Civil War. The part that I think might turn some people off is deals a lot with the military tactics. So it gets much more into maneuvers and how groups within Stonewall Jackson's command was moved around during battles, how as opposed, artillery units, stuff like that. A lot of military strategy, you're dealing with maps and stuff. So I think a lot of people might get turned off by that aspect of it. But the reason I enjoy this book so much is Stonewall Jackson is probably the figure I find the most interesting in the Civil War. Has an absolutely fascinating bio. He's a very peculiar man. He has a lot of interesting traits. He's very eccentric in some ways, and he is absolutely brilliant. He constantly wins battles that he had no business of winning, and it's one of the great what-ifs of history. There's countless alternate history books that are written solely on that one idea: what if Stonewall Jackson had not died during the Civil War, and how would that impacted? Several books play off the theme that if Stonewall Jackson had not died, the Confederacy might have won. A major reason for this is, if you study the history of the Civil War, basically before Stonewall Jackson died, Robert E. Lee didn't lose battles. After Stonewall Jackson died, Robert E. Lee rarely won battles. Stonewall Jackson was kind of his right-hand man, and after Stonewall Jackson died, Robert E. Lee and the Confederacy was just never as successful, and the Union Army began to win victory after victory. So it's one of those great what-ifs. What if Stonewall Jackson had not have died? How would that have impacted American and world history? He's a very fascinating figure. It's worth a read. Like I said, if you're not really into military tactics, I would suggest you find another biography on Stonewall Jackson that doesn't deal quite as much with the tactics side of his life. But I really enjoy this book. It's a very detailed one, which is one reason why I love the book so much, because it really covers every aspect of his life. So, Stonewall Jackson, The American Civil War by G.F.R. Henderson. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Those are my 5 favorite nonfiction books. Like I said, every week in November, I'll be posting a video about books/literature. So I hope you enjoyed this week's video, and I'll see you back on the channel next week for my next installment in this series. So I hope everybody has a great day, and hope you enjoy the video.